Hey guys, we're going to talk a little more genetics, but we're going to talk about snakes genetics here. This is really no different from the pea plants, maybe a little more exciting because it's something that actually moves around and stuff. But today's focus, this little lecture, is going to be kind of focusing on using Punnett squares to predict outcomes. And as you know, Punnett squares just tell you the probability of certain outcomes, and you can use it to kind of try to predict what certain things will be. So let's look at a totally different trait. Remember we said that a gene is a section of DNA that codes for a certain trait. In this case, the trait is going to be skin color of this snake. This is a Burmese python. This is what they look like in the wild. Most of them do. We call this trait, it happens to be dominant, but this trait also happens to be what we call the wild type, because whether it's dominant or recessive doesn't always mean it's going to be the one that shows up most commonly in nature. This one, the dominant trait, happens to also be the one that shows up in the wild, which is why we call it the wild type. This is the recessive version here. This is the albino version of this trait. This is not the wild type because, well, just look at it. This thing stands out quite a bit. Snakes with this homozygous recessive version, this albino trait, not only would not blend in very easily when they're babies, it'd probably be turned into food for different birds of prey, but if it somehow does reach adulthood, there's no way this guy here would be able to sneak up on anything and eat it. So it's very rare. So this is the wild type, happens to be dominant. This is the recessive one. So for whatever reason, this doesn't make any sense at all, but they decided to use A for albino, and we know that's not the way it should be. It should be the capital letter B for brown or anything else but this trait. So let's take a look at what happens here. This is really no different from Gregor Mendel's pea plant deal. We have a dominant trait here. We're going to use A for this brown and lowercase a for albino. I don't know why they did it that way. But if you really think about what's going on here, this is a dominant trait that came from one parent. So let's say this snake is the dad. This is the dad's one gene it got from its parent, and this is the other gene it got from its parent. So there's going to be the dad's dominant brown and the mom's dominant brown. You get a homozygous dominant all brown snake. That makes sense. This is mom's trait and dad's, or mom and dad, or dad and mom, however you look at it. Over here, this albino, it happened to get a gene right here for albinoism, and it got one from the other parents. Well, these two genes right here, let's look at these different animals, they come together to make this genotype. But when you go through the process of meiosis, which is basically just how different plants and animals make sperm and egg, these will break apart. And basically, if you have two genes, one and one, they're both the same, these will separate during the process of meiosis, and let's just call this a boy snake here, half the sperm will get this gene, and the other half of the sperm will get this one. It's not too exciting because both sperm basically get, half get this gene from mom and half get this gene from dad, but it's just kind of neat that the genes that came together to make this snake split, and really this snake, half the sperm have the mom trait from this snake's mom, and half the sperm have its dad's trait. So it's like there's the gene it got from mom, there's the gene it got from dad, splitting apart again. Same thing over here. This one will have to be the girl now, so these eggs, well, during the process of meiosis, they split apart, and this lowercase a, half the eggs will have that, and half the eggs will have this. So really think about that, okay? Now, the process of recombining these together, if meiosis splits these genes apart, fertilization, or the act of sex, will slam these back together. So if you think about how can you combine these four things, you do a Punnett square. So we call this one the P generation, the parents. If you have a homozygous dominant crossed with a homozygous recessive, it's pretty easy. Here's the parents. There's the other parent. So this is I think we said it's the dad, this is the mom. And here's all the combinations. You can combine this and this, you can combine this and that, you can combine this and this. It doesn't matter. If you have sperm with these and eggs with those, they're all going to be hybrids, okay? These inside the box represent the offspring, okay? We call it the F1 generation. We said P for parents, F1's for filial or daughter. It's what's affiliated. So 100% of the F1 generation is going to be hybrids. This is no different at all from what Gregor Mendel did. If you then cross these hybrids, it gets a little more interesting. These will separate again. And what it got from mom, let's say this is still a boy snake, half the sperm will get this from mom, and half the sperm will get this from dad. So you can see that the meiosis basically splits whatever it got from fertilization. So if its genotype is big A, little a, or dominant recessive, half the sperm will have that dominant trait and half the sperm will have that recessive trait. Come over here to the mom, same story. Half of her eggs will have this dominant trait and half of her eggs will have this recessive trait. You combine them and now you can get all sorts of cool combinations, 25% of them are going to get the homozygous dominant, 50% of them are going to get the hybrids, and 1/4 is going to have a sperm with this recessive trait and an egg with this recessive trait, and you're going to see albino little snakes. And this is cool too because you can see the 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. You can see the phenotypes that, 25 plus 50 is 75% are that brown wild type, and only 1/4 of them, 1 out of every 4, is going to have that albino trait showing up. So you make a Punnett square, you see that these right here, P generation, F1 generation, and the F2 generation. So P, F1, F2. This would just be an F1 generation of that hybrid cross here, okay? So let's kind of think about a few things here, what we learned on those Punnett squares. They simply tell you ratios and percentages of offspring. They don't tell you what the offspring are going to be. Punnett squares simply tell you the ratios and percentage of offspring. They don't suggest that you're only going to have 4 offspring. Nothing like that. Also, when an organism's phenotype is the dominant trait, its genotype could either be a hybrid or it could be the homozygous dominant. In other words, these snakes right here, down at the bottom where I'm looking here, this is a homozygous dominant and this is a hybrid. You cannot tell what the genotype is simply by looking at it. A hybrid and a homozygous dominant look identical. Even though their genotypes are different, their phenotypes are the same. So it could be either one of these. The only way to find out is a test cross. Remember that for later. If the organism's phenotype is a recessive trait, in other words, if it's recessive, like this albino trait, you know that its genotype has to be homozygous recessive. There's no other way. All right, so here we go. Let's say I have a friend who has an albino Burmese python, like this really pretty one over here, and I want one too. I go to a pet store, and they're too expensive. Let's just say I have $200, and these albinos are $300. Well, I can't afford one, obviously. However, these snakes over here, these wild type ones, they are about $100 each. So I can afford 2 of the wild type brown Burmese pythons. But none of them are albino. How can I still get my albino Burmese python? If I have 2 of these brown ones, how could I get an albino? I want you to think about this question and pause it. Pause this video and answer it. So pause the video and think, how can I still get an albino Burmese python from 2 non-albinos? Pause. Well, if you're back here and you thought about it, it's pretty simple. You want 2 hybrids. If you have 2 heterozygous snakes that are hybrids for the brown and the recessive albino, just simply breed them and about 1 out of every 1/4 should pop out albino. Pretty basic. So if you got that one, good. They get harder from this point. With that hybrid and hybrid cross, if I'm taking a heterozygous albino snake and or heterozygous wild type brown snake, it's going to look brown, and another hybrid cross, how many of the babies could be albino? I want you to pause this video and think about that. Okay, well, if you're back from this little riddle here, what percentage of the babies could be albino? I'm sure that a lot of you guessed 25%, and you were wrong, because all of them could be albino. None of them could be albino. Half of them could be albino. Now, you're confusing with how many could be and how many should be. Yes, of course, 25% of them should be albino, but just like a coin toss, it doesn't mean you're going to get 50% heads and 50% tails. If you have 2 hybrids and you're crossing them, if you were really, really lucky, every single one of them could come out albino. It's wildly unlikely from a statistical standpoint. The probability of that is super rare. But it could happen. It could. All right. Well, let's say we have a clutch of snakes that's only 6 babies. So I breed my hybrid with my other hybrid, and I have 6 snakes, and none of them are albino. Did I make a mistake? I want you to think about that. Pause this video and talk to someone, or if you're watching this by yourself, just whatever you gotta do, pause this and think about that and give your answer out loud. So go ahead and pause. Well, welcome back. What could have happened here? Did you make a mistake? Well, no. 6 is a really small sample size. Matter of fact, from a probability standpoint, if you had 6 snakes and you had the hybrid cross, where you have 2 hybrids, statistically, your next 2 snakes should be albino. You'd have 8 total. 6 plus 2 is 8. 2 of those 8 would be albino and be 25%. It doesn't mean it would be, but you didn't really make a mistake. In other words, did the guy at the pet store rip you off? Don't get mad yet. It's a really small sample size. So the answer is not necessarily statistically the next 2 snakes should be albino. It's just a really small sample size. Well, let's look at this one. If the first clutch of snakes is 12 babies, how many could be albino? Well, I want you to pause this video and think about that. All right then. Well, this is pretty easy. You have a hybrid crossed with a hybrid. It's a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. In other words, 25% should be albinos. 25% of 12 is 3. And if you said that 3 could be albino, you're wrong again, because none of them could be albino. 1 or 2 of them, or 3, or all 12. How many should be? Well, 3 should be albino. All of them, none of them, anything could be. Punnett squares simply predict. They don't tell the actual outcome. All right, here's a really fun trick question. Let's say I'm breeding these snakes and I want to make a profit. I want to sell some of my snakes to other breeders who want to also produce albino snakes. However, I don't want to sell any of my albinos, okay? So in other words, I'm breeding my hybrid with my other hybrid, my hybrid male with a hybrid female, and they're pooping snakes out left and right. And it says here my second clutch is 30 babies. How many of those 30 baby snakes could I sell to other breeders so that they too could produce albino snakes? Only sell the ones that could produce albinos, but don't sell any of my albinos. Now let's just pretend here that statistically it works out just the way it should, okay? I'll let you read this, and I want you to really think about this. How many snakes could I sell that actually could make albinos but aren't albinos themselves? No one gets this question right, so it's pretty tricky. I'll let you pause the video and think about this. All right, well, welcome back. Well, you know that 25, 50, 25, or 1 to 2 to 1. 25% of these snakes are going to be homozygous dominant and cannot produce albino snakes. Even if you breed them with an albino, it still won't produce albinos. You also know that 25% of those snakes are going to be homozygous recessive. And they are going to be albino, but we're not going to sell those. We're going to keep those. That leaves 50%, which are the hybrids, and they can produce albino babies. So 50% of 30 is 15. So if you guess 15, you're wrong, because I have 2 parents that are also hybrids. So if you sell the mom and the dad, you have 17 total. That wasn't very nice. All right, last question. Let's say my first clutch of eggs is 39 eggs. When they hatch, not one of them, 0 of them show the albino trait. Did I make a mistake? Did the guy rip me off at the pet store? Is there a way to know what their genotypes are? Now, I can't tell the genotypes of the parent snakes. He told me there was a hybrid female and a hybrid male. I have no way of knowing what their genotypes are. I mean, statistically, let's just round this up to 40 eggs. How many should have been albino at this point? 10. And none of them, not 10 or 9 or 8 or 7, 6, 5, 4, not even 1 is albino. Statistically, I'm starting to think I got screwed here. But how can I prove him wrong? I want you to pause this and think, how could I test what the genotype of my hybrid male and hybrid female, if they really are, how could I test what they are? Pause this and think about that long and hard, please. Well, this is what we're going to do. It's called a test cross. Okay, we should have about 10. We're going to test for sure. Test cross is this. We're going to cross these snakes with a known genotype, and the only known genotype is an albino. So we know that it's got at least one of the dominant traits. Well, if it is, let's say we take an albino and cross them with one of our snakes, if it's a hybrid, half of those offspring should also be albino. And if that's the case, we're just having the worst luck ever. If the pet store owner ripped us off, when we breed this albino with what we're assuming is a homozygous dominant, so he lied to us, none of the offspring will come out albino. So I would just say, hey, let me breed it with one of your albinos. If half of them come out albino, all right, it's just weird luck, weird ways it worked out. If I breed his albino with one of these and none of them come out albino, I'll say, hey, I'm just going to keep this albino because you lied to me. These homozygous dominant ones will never produce albinos no matter what. And this is called a test cross. It just gives you better odds, and you know what the genotype of this one is. Lastly, this is that dihybrid cross. Look how complicated this gets.